afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. If you could all turn your attention this way, we have a short program, but an important one. My name is Robb Dimmick. I'm half of Stages of Freedom along with Ray Rickman. We are an interracial endeavor to build bridges across the racial divide and create understanding by using Rhode Island African American history, elevating it and celebrating it, and understanding that it is not a separate history. Because of Rhode Island's deep involvement in enslaving Africans, it is an intertwined history. And both of us from either side of the racial divide need to understand that so that we can become what I believe we need to become, which is the beloved community. Within our work, beyond celebrating and elevating African American history, is ensuring that African American children, ages 5 to 19, learn how to swim. We have been doing this for 10 years through our Swim Empowerment Program. It is an award-winning program. It is the only program in the nation that is serving upwards of 500 children a year. Parents choose a YMCA convenient to them within the state, and they sign up their children, and we pay for those lessons through grants and through our museum and shop. Everything in the shop has been donated. Funds from the sales help pay for swimming lessons. I hope that you'll visit our website, stagesofreedom.org. It is a powerhouse of databases, resources, videos. Within it, you will find On the Road to Freedom, which is a town-by-town guide of African American sites in Rhode Island, and Disappearing Ink, which is a bibliography of writings by and about Rhode Island African Americans that I have now collected more than 1,000 entries in the smallest state in the nation. So I want to now introduce and welcome Ray Rickman, and we thank you all for coalescing for this extraordinary honoring of our special guest.
So for probably 50 years, Elizabeth Francis, I wore a dark blue suit at all these affairs and dark ties and the like. And I see that both of our very part-time, wonderful employees have outdressed me. So we want to welcome you. Rob didn't tell you that Stages of Freedom never lets a year go by without doing something honorific or special for someone way under 30 who has done something way wonderful. We find that people like to give their awards to 70-year-old people with money. And that's nice, but it's wrong. We all brag about we're going to encourage the next generation. And at Stages of Freedom, we do. So, you meet somebody who is looking at, Black history, and there's no such thing as Black history. This piece of history that Owen has taken on is women's history, which it never gets any credit for. Are you listening? Mm-hmm. Women initiated this in Pembroke. Women. And we're so whatever that we're always doing something dumb, talking about Black history. Black history is not the slave coming up against the white master. That's multiracial. All my life, I wrote this out. It has nothing to do, I talk too much sometimes. And it has nothing to do with age that I wrote this out. It has to do with the importance of it. All my life, I have sought people out who are different from me and intelligent. I build my spirit up with people 95 and younger of all races and gender, all the time. I don't do 6 months and then remember that I'm not talking to anybody who happens to be Latino or indigenous or, which I'm not. You have to do that, or the world will not change. When someone comes into my life who happens to be Latino, I get excited, because lately it is hard to keep people in your life, and especially young people. I like intergenerational experiences. I am amazed at what people 21 know that I don't. Really. Did you hear that, Rose? They sometimes know things you don't know. Now, I didn't say they know better than I would, but they know different, and it's valuable. Into Stages of Freedom comes Owen to order a book. And you would not think this is all that exciting, but we haven't had a brown student come into Stages of Freedom in 9 years to order a book, and a book not for class, and a book that they're going to read. And it's fences. You talk about that making him an exciting individual. And I'm sad about society, where brown students don't come in and order a black title. I'm sad. So before we know it, he gets hired long distance, 3 hours a week to work for us. He can write. He understands. He understands black history, black life. Oh, we made a good choice. Our goal at Stages of Freedom is to meet some of the most interesting people in this state, and we do. You know, Rose Weaver comes in to visit us. I can't tell you how important that is, because life's shorter than you think, and you will look up and you will not have spent your time with people who stimulated, who educated, who said what you're doing is good or useful. So from London, he works long distance for 3 hours a week, and he does a good job, and then he comes back, and he still only works 3 hours a week, because he's a scholar. He is a scholar student. He has things to do, and we're only one of them. But what he does is he proves that he cares about our purpose. He cares. And he understands civil rights. But I don't understand how much. One day I'm walking on Brown Street, and I bump into him. Remember, he only works 3 hours a week for us, so I don't see him all the time. And we get to talking over an hour, and he says to me, and I wrote this down, I plan, it's not young people talk, I plan, I'm hopeful, you know, young people talk is maybe. I plan to be a civil rights lawyer, and he knows what a civil rights lawyer is. Now, does everyone in this room know what a civil rights lawyer is? No, you don't. One or two people shook their head, but you don't. A civil rights lawyer used to be Thurgood Marshall, interested in public education, interested in public housing, interested in saving Condon Street Baptist Church and others from being ripped down by elite universities. That's a civil rights lawyer. You call, they come, and it's all of life. Almost every civil rights lawyer, and I'm not criticizing them, it sounds like I am, that you see on television now is involved in a young black man or black woman being shot in the head and possibly murdered by a police officer. You don't hear them on television talking about integrating public schools. He understands Thurgood Marshall's civil rights, and that excited me to no end. So I get excited because my friend Rose Weaver told me something 3 months ago that I've been pushing back. She said that she and I, she was just talking about herself, but she encompassed me. We're in the final quarter. Did you hear that? If I live to 100, I'm in the final quarter. So now I'm creating an endowment. I'm helping 2 young people that I think are going to be serious, that will be here when my final quarter is over, doing the work I wish I were here to do. So he tells me about his senior thesis, something I've thought about for years and waiting for someone to do something serious about. And it's hard to get people to do serious things about certain things. He did it. And it's stunning. I've read every line. Please welcome Owen.
I want to thank, first of all, everyone for being here, since I can't do it enough. Just about everyone I could want to be here is here today. Please join me in thanking Ray Rickman and Robb Dimmick of Stages of Freedom for recognizing my work in this charming and formal way. Working at Stages of Freedom alongside 2 people who are so committed to the preservation and celebration of Rhode Island's Black history has enriched my life and this project. I want to thank Professor Naoko Shibusawa, the best thesis advisor I've ever worked with, and the best thesis advisor I could have asked for. Thank you. I want to thank my family, without whom I would not be here today. I want to thank the many students, faculty, and community members who were there in '68, or '73, or later, who lived this history, and some of whom were willing to share it with you. Jennifer. And I want to thank the many people in this room who in other ways, small and large, have allowed me to do this very important and fascinating work. So I want to start by saying thank you. I wrote my thesis on the 1968 Black student walkout from Brown and Pembroke, or should I say Pembroke and Brown. The walkout at Brown is one of hundreds of Black student protests happening at campuses across the nation in the late 1960s and early 1970s that compel universities like Brown to diversify. I'm talking about increased Black enrollment, more Black faculty and administrators, Africana Studies departments, and things like the Rights and Reasons Theater at Brown. I'm not the first scholar to study the 1968 walkout. Historians so far have primarily looked at the long-term consequences of the walkout, some of the things I've just mentioned. I decided to do something different. I wanted to look at how student protests like these happened. What motivated them? What allies they relied on? And how they were able to leverage their particular position as students at Brown to make a powerful and bureaucratic institution move forward. To investigate this, I looked at extensive archives, and I always tell people this was the fun part of the project. I conducted 12 or 15 interviews with former students, faculty members, and community people who were here at the time. How the 1960 Black student walkout from Brown happened was uniquely different from how other Black student protests happened nationally at this time. This was probably the only Black student movement in the late 60s to involve a church. Students walked out to the Congdon Street Baptist Church, which is 4 blocks this way, and then you make a left. This was probably the only Black student protest in the late 1960s where a walkout takes place in this regard. There's other protests going on in the 60s. Some of them involve, in Columbia, they occupy Hamilton Hall, the building that they frequently occupy. At Fisk, they burst into the boardroom and take the president and the trustees hostage. Not violently, but they won't let them leave until they consider these demands. What happens at Brown is different. The students walk out, and it's not just a march from one location to another location and then they all go back to their dorms. They entirely dissociate from Brown dorms, from Brown dining halls, from Brown classes. And they do that for 4 days. For 4 days, they spend in the basement of the Congdon Street Baptist Church. Finally, as Ray alluded to, I won't say spoiled because if something's important, you can't say it enough. This is a movement that comes from the women at Pembroke, which also makes it special. Church and community, which are so connected to these Black students at Brown, help explain why the walkout happens in this unique way. Consider the year in which all of this goes down. High-profile political violence rocks the United States and much of the world. There are urban rebellions across the nation after Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated in April. 2 months later, Robert Kennedy is assassinated in June. There are riots at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago over the nation's continued involvement in the Vietnam War. In '68, over 300,000 young men, and remember, this is something that is disproportionately affecting Black young men, are drafted to an active war site in Vietnam. The students at Brown are aware of all this. It's hard to ignore. They knew that a wrong move could lead to their suspension, their arrest, or perhaps their being sent to a war zone in a faraway country. They deliberately choose a dramatic form of protest that Brown could not ignore, but that would not get them arrested or expelled. They're strategic about it. The students left Brown during the daytime, as is permitted, and they stay at one of the oldest Black churches in Rhode Island. Brown could hardly argue that the students were causing trouble. But they were. Good trouble. The students' detachment from the university dramatizes Brown's lack of institutional support for students and faculty and ideas coming from people of color, and compel the university, after 4 days, to accept with relative success the students' demands. Now, none of this can happen without the church. The students walk out in December, and so those of you who are familiar with New England weather, you can't walk out in December and go to Prospect Park. Not comfortably, at least. They need a place to go. And So for 4 days, they go to this church, and they are housed, they're fed, they are comforted and sustained materially and spiritually during a tense moment of struggle. Political action can mean calling the president and asking him or her to do something. A lot of what people consider political action is something like this. But it can also mean doing the important and frankly underappreciated work of supporting groups like these students who are taking their own action. The walkout does not happen without the church. So the church has not received its due attention, and neither has the role of community in this moment. These black students at Brown feel an acute lack of community. There are few black classmates. Most of the students I interviewed went all 4 years at Brown without taking a single class with a black classmate or taught by a black professor. And there's no particular clubs, societies, or programming that Brown is offering the students. The students have a need for belonging, protection, and support, and they find it at the Condon Street Baptist Church. The church gives them the support, the strength, and the courage to take this action. Finally, by centering the students' desire for community in 1968, we can appreciate and understand why it is the women of Pembroke who initiate the call for a walkout. The number of black women at Pembroke was smaller, vastly smaller, than the number of black men at Brown, which is small to begin with. They more acutely felt this lack of community, and their small numbers made negotiations with the dean of Pembroke particularly difficult. Also, their status of being black women before people like Michelle Obama. One of the people I interviewed told me that her impression was that administrators at Pembroke thought they didn't have to listen to these black women. They should be happy that they're at Pembroke. So the women at Pembroke have this greater need to take action, to be supported at Brown on campus. And they're also more likely to venture off campus. There was a famous black and Portuguese bar, though I'm sure not many of the women at Pembroke were there. Many of these students were also involved in GED programming, volunteering, and helping out with high schools, such as Hope up the street. But most importantly, many of the black women at Pembroke were involved in the Condon Street Baptist Church. They would get hot meals there. They would stay there if they were not able to go home for a vacation. And what I've heard from more than one student that I've interviewed is there's this sense that if you don't get off Brown every once in a while, you go crazy. And Condon is one of the most restorative things for the psyche in this regard. This past semester, the Black Star Journal, which is Brown's black newspaper, wrote a fantastic article on the 1968 walkout from Brown. Why do people continue to be interested in this event, decades after the fact? The fact that Brown decided to admit more students of color, or hired the first black president of an Ivy League, Ruth Simmons, in 2001, or commissioned the first slavery and justice report of its kind by an institution, was not predestined. It was the result of pressure by students, faculty, administrators, and probably a national community. You cannot tell the story of Brown without talking about the walkout. If you're someone who wants change, and there's a lot of change you might want right now, you may want to look to the Black student group in 1968. They recognized that diversity was not simply getting people through the door, it was doing right by them. The students saw that their institution had a long way to go. Against the odds, they deliberated, they built alliances, and they took action. Change does not happen without pressure, and the students in 1968 are keen and strategic in applying it. Now, I could talk all day about my thesis, but I'd like to open the field for some questions now.
I have a comment.
Yes.
So, my grandmother was a member of Providence Baptist Church, and I can remember as a child, they had the maid breakfast. They were, my grandmother was a member of Congress Street Baptist Church, and I can remember my grandmother, they had their maid breakfast, and it was the Brown students who would come to the maid breakfast. And if they did not have money, they were always fed. I also wanted to say that you said there were no black clubs. I have a member of my sorority who was in Pembroke College, and I don't know if she pledged on campus, but I do know she was a member of the sorority, and this was in the 1920s. It was Beatrice Coleman, who was like one of the earliest graduates of Brown. So I just want to, I don't know, I'm not trying to, I just think there were black clubs on campus because she pledged back in like 1924.
Thank you for bringing that up. I have a question for you now. Is this a black sorority
It is a
at
black
Brown in the
sorority.
1920s?
And I'm wondering, I know this person pledged the sorority in 1920s, and I'm not sure if the chapter was there, but I know she was part of Pembroke College campus.
Okay.
So.
You see Ray shaking his head.
Well-
It's true, but it collapsed after that end.
Okay,
We had this discussion at the archives at
okay,
Pembroke
I'm just
yesterday.
throwing it up, so.
Well, also to your point, in the 1920s, there's a group of black students who organize at Brown and try to get a chapter of Alpha organized at Brown, and Brown says no. So they make it a Providence chapter, and it includes many schools in Rhode Island. But it's not recognized by Brown until '74, so after the walkout.
Okay,
So there are organizations, but Brown does not explicitly support them at this moment. Of course, black students are very adept at this time and throughout history at finding community, but Brown is just sort of the weak link in getting it to happen. Abood.
I have a question. I'm probably repeating myself. What is your intervention within the argument of like the history of student movements? Because you allude to Columbia in '68, to other Kent School and other colleges. And in your thesis, you argued that some of these students' demands were met, although some were reneged. That through negotiating with the administration, they managed to increase or make a pledge to increase black enrollment. My question is, in what way does that make it different from other schools, given that I think you could look at all these schools, both today, the events of last year, and in '68, they all engage in negotiations with their administrations with various degrees of success. That's my question, is what's your intervention? Why are you saying that Brown and Pembroke is different if they also engage in negotiations?
The negotiations themselves are not unique. Negotiations happen at all of these universities. What brings about these negotiations is, so in the late '60s and early '70s, there's something called the Black Student Movement. And it's at Brown, it's at Columbia, it's at San Francisco State College, it's at all of these public and private, historically black and predominantly white, northern and southern universities across the nation. There are walkouts, but it's more of a march to somewhere and then they all go back. So that makes this particular act of protest distinct. And it probably has something to do with how quickly Brown is able to change their mind about the demands. They negotiated for 8 months prior to the walkout. No dice, really. And then the walkout happens, and 4 days later, Brown is more willing to at least nominally commit to these demands. So the intervention has to do with the how. What the students achieve is very special, but similar to what happens at many other universities in terms of curriculum, more students, more Black faculty members. It's the method that's unique at Brown, and that's the subject and the focus of this thesis.
So my follow-up is why? You said the how, but why? Kind of going down to why do you think it's different? Why do you think that this specific action is different?
Can I interject? Because I think the intervention isn't necessarily that Brown is different per se from all the other persons. I think that from my perspective as a thesis advisor, this is maybe the intervention team, how Brown, to look at the community in the student groups, right? The vital role of the community, because in the ways in which I came to Brown about 20 years ago and I heard about the 68 walkout and thought, well, my colleague Francois Helen, what new came when I got the 68 walkout, right? But what Owen Hwang was the community, how essential the community was in making the walkout successful, right? Which suggests that, as Owen was saying, like, these students couldn't just do it on their own. But the way that Brown had moralized, it's like you see the picture of the students walking out and the demands met, not so they didn't understand through like ECSC, et cetera, et cetera. But their vital role was because they were so lacking in community at Brown, they were so lonely that they were able to rely upon the community, and that's really important. I think that perhaps, even though you said the church parts involved in other places, they could have been. We just don't know, because that part hasn't been studied as much. But I will leave it to my.
But I would say that Edgewood College right down the road and some of the other 13 sister schools were involved, but we didn't have that community. We did not.
Yeah.
So churches are involved in Black student protests throughout the 60s and 70s, but the church being the actual location of the protest is somewhat special about Brown. At Fisk, students actually walk out of the church and protest, so it's a little bit different. I'm not saying that Brown is totally unique. It's interesting both because it's special and also because it reveals things about broader trends within Black student protests at this time. You're asking the right questions.
Question here.
Yes.
So you were talking about like how this whole, like the walkout was to initiate negotiation. What were the things that they were negotiating for within the universities?
That's another good question. So the students' demands, notably at Brown, all have something to do with a desire for community. So they want more Black students on campus. One of the women I interviewed, who was class of '69, said there were no Black parties at Pembroke. One, because the administration was stricter over there. And secondly, they didn't have enough people. There were 6 women in the class and there were 10 men at Brown in that class. So it's hard to organize with that small amount of people. And that's why you see the students involving allies at the church. The other demands concerned more Black faculty members. They wanted changes to the curriculum to be more relevant to Black students. And they wanted 12 demands. I won't give them all to you. But one of the notable ones, which is sort of forgotten about, is 8 months before the walkout, they asked for total divestment from the university from racist enterprises. And the students sort of let that go to the wayside. It's unclear exactly why, and I've asked students about this, but the demands are interesting. It speaks to their desire for community, and it speaks to the work that still needs to be done at Brown and many institutions. Who's next?
There are 2 people over there.
I'll go from my left to right, so Steve?
Owen's proud uncle here. I wonder, at the moment the walkout began, was it spontaneous? Was there a catalyst, a precipitating external event? And how was the walkout coordinated between the Pembroke women and the Brown students?
So, I think there's a tendency among us to want to see these as spontaneous events. Something happens and they've had enough, and it's a moment of pure determination, and they act and they get it done just through their will. What happens at Brown is there's not necessarily a particular catalyst. They're negotiating, things are not working, months go by, it's still not working, and they start talking about what can we do to get the university to stop dragging their feet on this. So they're deliberate, and it takes a while for all the plans to sort of come together for Walkout. You had a second part to your question.
Was there coordination between the Pembroke women and the Brown students?
Yes, this is a good point. In 1967, the black students at Brown organized what they call the Afro-American Society. It's Brown's first sort of organization for black students in particular, officially. And this is the body through which the students negotiate with the university, because you have to have an organization to negotiate with something. You need a spokesperson, you need a president. It can't just be a group. And this is sort of the go-between for the women at Pembroke and the men at Brown. The universities are more connected than you think. They attend classes together, and the ultimate administration is the same. The president of Brown is the highest authority figure at Pembroke. But they live separately and they eat separately to sort of give that traditional value of sex-segregated education. So they're in close contact. The women come up with this demand, and this is pretty established among the students, because they were having more trouble negotiating with their specific dean, and also because they had this probably more pressing urge to solve the question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, please.
I just want to start off by saying I think it's great that you're acknowledging the fact that black women specifically were leading the movement itself. I'm also just curious, like, I don't know anything about this movement at all, so forgive me if I'm asking a silly question. But I'm curious what the racial demographics look like outside of black students that were involved in taking the space. Were there other people of color that were also walking out, or was it solely black students?
This is a good question. I would have talked about it here, but I didn't want to go too long. So, the number of black students is small at Brown and Pembroke at this time, and the number of Asian, Chicano, and indigenous students is even smaller. I had the opportunity to speak with one of two Asian students who were at Brown at this time, Wing Tech Lung, class of '69, and he told me that there were white and other students of color that were not black who were sympathetic to the demands. Their understanding, or their MO, was to let the black students take charge. And my understanding is they really only become sympathetic after they hear the black students' demands and that they're going to walk out. So there are students who are supporting, people are passing out pamphlets. They organized a speak out on the main green, which gets over 1,000 students in attendance at the same time of the walkout. In terms of actually joining the students and walking out, they don't. And frankly, I think it was better that way. I don't know how well you can see this, but this is the black students walking down Angel Street, and there are 3 or 4 white people walking alongside them. Journalists from the Daily Herald and the Providence Journal. There are people paying attention to this that are not black and that are sympathetic, but the impetus and the organization and the actual participation comes from black students. One other thing to note is that it's of and for and by black students, but everyone benefits. So after the 1968 walkout, there are more Asian students on campus, there are more indigenous students on campus, there are more Chicano students on campus. And this ends up being sort of contentious because they're all competing for the same number of non-white spots. Because Brown is slow to change. But yes, there are other people who are sympathetic and many people benefit that are not black students, and that's important to remember.
You see if there's a last question, and I have something to tell you.
Okay. Last question, if anyone wants it.
That's what I thought.
It's like anyone but Mom. See how we look
No.
around the room?
I'm saving the best for last.
Owen, this is a long process, and obviously developmental. What did you learn the most about yourself through this writing process?
Start sooner. And the people who don't, the people who work with me most closely on this project laugh the hardest there, because it's true. Frankly, I'm glad that there was a deadline on this, because I could have kept working on it for another year. And I'm glad there's a time limit on me today, because I could have talked about it for an hour. I think scope is important. To be deliberate with what I want to do and how I want to approach it. I learned certainly a lot about history, but in terms of what I learned about myself, I would say that's it, to be deliberate. And I'm very glad that I had the opportunity to work on this.
So, in every community, Jewish, Latino, Vietnamese, Laotian, whatever, there are people who are really the deans. And Charlie Nichols, of course, comes to Brown to be black professor first. It's complicated, it's a mess, they don't treat him right. And his fabulous wife, Mildred Nichols, supports him, and no, we're not going back to the black college, we're going to make them do what they promised. Mildred could not come because for the first time in her life, she has a medical problem that will not let her come to something important. 95 plus, first time. I hope I can get there and be able to come to everything I want. Congratulations, Owen. Oh, how I wish I could be at the reception in your honor. I have accepted the fact that I cannot. I have accepted the fact that I cannot. I know you will be surrounded by wonderful friends and supporters. Mildred Nichols.